Good day, Brigade. This is Bahbi, and we are back with our regularly scheduled programming. Today, we're going to be covering two interesting topics that have come up throughout the past month. Both fairly recent. The first is, according to a story from Insider, formerly Business Insider, kind of a whole weird thing that they're doing with their name, that the GOP is planning on doing a mock convention for a constitutional convention in Denver. Now, to be perfectly fair, this isn't the first mock convention that's been held. They held one in 2016 and have shown some interesting, to say the least, results. But yeah, that's one thing we're going to be talking about. And our other little bit here, we're going to be talking about our good old pal Andrew Yang is back and coming about with forming a new third party. So that'll be interesting. Anyways, here's a little fact for you. Did you know that on average, a secretary will use its left hand for 56% of what they type on a keyboard? This is because the most common letters in the English language are on the left side of the keyboard, whereas on the right side of the keyboard, you've only got I and N. Yeah. So, in spite of many of you being right-handed, you probably have a more dominant left hand on the keyboard. Welcome. The left-handed thing you guys have to do for once. Anyways, let's get on with our show. So, to get started with our show here, we're going to be talking about our good old Constitutional Convention here. Now, it's not uncommon, and in fact has been an ever-present thing ever since the Constitution was established in 1788, that the Constitutional Convention measure, Article 5, be called forth. Now, more often than not, a process to amend the Constitution has gone by the first method of Constitutional Convention, so to speak, which is basically just an amendment gets proposed, it goes through the normal process of going through Congress and or the states, and then eventually gets, if it's lucky, put on the Constitution. This is shall we say, slow process. So much so that people pretty much 3 years older than myself and younger have never actually seen the process ever succeed, even close to succeeding. But it's not impossible, as that's actually how we've got every constitutional amendment thus far. And now the second and lesser known method for amending the Constitution, and mostly because it's so goddamn insane and a challenge, to say the least, is the calling of a constitutional convention. So, how does that happen? Well, when a sufficient number of state legislatures decide that it's necessary to call forth a constitutional convention to make changes to parts or all of the Constitution, usually by getting the requisite number of people to vote for it, and call for an open constitutional convention, which has been done a lot. Let's just leave it at a lot, because we do not have time to cover the number of times this happened. But basically, states will call for a constitutional convention. Now, what that would entail is pretty broad in what exactly can occur on that. So, the idea of what a constitutional convention is incredibly vague, especially since no one's ever actually done it. You know, aside from actually establishing the Constitution. But basically, the idea is that each state would send representatives and individuals to represent the ideas of their states and their people. At least this is what would typically likely be the case. These individuals would then go and convene in a particular area for a constitutional convention, where they would discuss and debate various ideas to amend to the Constitution itself. Now, anything approved by this convention, and thus, if this convention is legitimate, would become a constitutional amendment to be put up for vote. And in this case, would become a constitutional amendment because, well, you have the states convened and they can vote on it right away. Now, the individual details for how the convention would work would literally vary depending upon who managed to call the convention successfully, what rules are set upon by the individual convention members, and how the individual things are going to be tackled. One thing that most people are in agreement on is that a constitutional convention has to have a set defined purpose. And that's what's concerning a lot of people with what the GOP is attempting, because their set purpose seems to be vague enough to where they can change pretty much anything they want. And their desire seems to be to create a one-sided convention in which they are the dominant force. Now, I will note that at their mock conventions, they have rejected measures like abolishing the 14th Amendment and things like that. But that doesn't mean these issues couldn't be put on the docket, nor does it mean that they can't also add issues such as, a constitutional ban on abortion. Now, there are many saying, oh, they never go that far, but as we've seen, a politician can only be trusted as far as you can throw it halfway through your maximum force, because let's face it, if you were to throw them all the way, they would probably cheat on you again. Cheat and lie on you. But that's basically what entails a constitutional convention in theory. So what would be the relative odds of success of actually calling forth a constitutional convention? Realistically speaking, not great. See, America has this thing with the current Constitution in that they kinda like it. No, don't get me wrong, there have definitely been times people wanted to amend it and amend lots of parts of it, especially for updating to modern times, fitting ideological needs, and all that sort of fun stuff. But overall, the overall work you have to do to actually get a convention called forth is a monumental, expensive, massive task. However, we should say this now in that there are a lot of people taking on that monumental, expensive task, and a lot of dark money going around, a lot of cryptocurrency being used for this purpose, and a lot of these people seem to be a part of the Oompa Loompas team. And that is what's really scary about it. Now, that's not everyone. In fact, there are even progressive and leftist factions also trying to call for a constitutional convention and have for a while. For example, Wolfpack. Yes. Wolf Political Action Committee. Don't ask me why they chose that name. I honestly think it's stupid. But then again, we're the Mongoose Brigade, so who are we to judge? Anywho, progressives have also been calling for a constitutional convention, and a lot of their measures are because they want to change a lot of things about the Constitution as well. And if we're being completely honest here, we ourselves aren't against the idea of a constitutional convention. In fact, we kind of have a lot of our own grievances and ideas for amending the Constitution ourselves that we will be covering. And let's do next episode. How about that? Yeah, next episode we're going to be covering some constitutional amendments we want to get it thrown in. Don't know if we've done that episode before, but if we have, we're doing it again. So, where do we stand overall on this? It's kind of hard to say. So, we favor the idea of a constitutional convention if and only if specific conditions are met. The first condition is that all viewpoints, regardless of whether or not there's a political party or political affiliation, must be represented. Even if it's just one individual. They deserve to have their voice heard, especially when it comes to such a monumental change like altering one of the founding documents. Keep in mind that the Constitution is not the first document that laid out law for the U.S. government in establishing what the U.S. government was. That's actually the Articles of Confederation, which a lot of people who seem to want to favor 1776 as the starting point of our country seem to conveniently forget. Anyways, that side note pushed away. First condition is all ideas and viewpoints that are able to be represented must be represented. And this means not basing it on party, but basing it on actual idea. Second, it must be an open invite for all American citizens because this is our damn Constitution. You know what? Let's extend it even further. It's an open invite for anyone within the borders of the United States. However, this does not automatically mean you will get to vote on the process. Only those who are eligible to vote in the United States should be able to vote within the Constitutional Convention on individual constitutional amendments. Third, one vote, one state should not be a part of it. Now you might be wondering, well, it seems perfectly reasonable. Why would we get rid of that? And here's the kicker to it. One state, one vote gives a decisive advantage to one particular party, the GOP, and they know this. They've in fact mentioned it multiple times. That Insider article I was talking about earlier where we got this original source of information, you can actually look it up, and I believe it was either Ted Cruz or some other GOP member even stated that a one state, one vote would favor the GOP, because it would. Because the number of GOP states would be far greater than the number of those who are more favored towards Democrats, and thus the advantage would fall with them. That's actually why they hold a huge advantage in the Senate, even though they have been declining in popularity up until 2016 when there was a sudden uptick. So, we gotta get rid of that. That cannot be a part of it. And the last thing is, if nothing at this Constitutional Convention can be ultimately decided, or if even one issue trips it up completely, the convention must end, and nothing must change. Because if it's to the point where it's too hyper-partisan to make a fair and reasonable judgment about what should be given for all American peoples, and the peoples who reside within our borders who must be protected under that Constitution, then we're not really aiming to make the Constitution better for everyone. We're just aiming to make it an ideological goal for some. And that is the worst possible scenario. So, on to our next topic, Andrew Yang. And it looks like the Yang Gang is back because he and a couple of moderate Republicans are pushing forward with a new political party that is named, you guessed it, Forward. So, why is this happening? Well, Andrew Yang and the others claim that third parties are what's really desired by the American people, especially when you give the current approval rates of both parties, how many people are deciding to remain independent because they don't want to be affiliated with either party, and a variety of other reasons. And he's not wrong. He's not wrong on a lot of that. I'm just going to say it right now, at least for our purposes, the reason why we're an independent and not a part of a political party is that we don't feel there is a current political party out there that represents our interests and our desires, which is kind of where Andrew Yang is sort of going with this. After all, he is planning on holding a bunch of, I don't know what he was calling them. It's still pretty up in the air and preliminary right now, so there's still a lot of things that could change and will be changed, so take everything we say with a bit of skepticism because all this is subject to change. But basically, he's going to go around with a couple other people who are going to help start this party, and we're talking about moderates on both sides, left and right. God, American left is not left. At best, it's centrist. Sorry, rant. Anyways, the overall claim is that he's making on the failure of previous third parties is that they've been limited due to their ideological narrowness and all sorts of manner like that. Now this is where we start to be like, Yang? Your idea of forward isn't exactly A, new, and B, kind of falls in line with a couple of historic third parties that have tried, well, exactly what you're trying. And to combat the whole ideological narrowness thing, we'd like to bring you to the idea of the Reform Party in the 90s. Now, for those of you who may not know, the Reform Party was a political party founded in the 90s by Ross Perot in order to provide that third-party candidate that the American Union was so desperately seeking at that time. Because, much like nowadays, there was a high desire for a new third party because both parties had been doing things that a lot of people did not like or care for, and they felt like their voices were being marginalized. So, comes our buddy Perot, builds us a reform party, and, well, believe it or not, he actually did pretty damn well up until he quit. Yeah. So, in his first campaign, there wasn't actually an official proper reform party, but there was still Ross Perot running as an independent, and he was doing actually pretty dang well. In fact, this is probably about the time he had his best chance, and he almost won a couple states. Actually, I think he did win a couple states. And he actually put a real problem for both the left and the right. So, what did both the Democrats and Republicans do? They took his ideas, and they took the ones they liked, and they adopted those, and threw out the others. I mean, aside from Ross Perot's flaky leadership and the fact that your next best figure for the entire Reform Party was Donald Trump, no, we're not kidding on that. He actually was a Reform Party member for a little while. It's kind of weird. Well, anyway, you don't really have a strong party, and it ultimately collapsed because of ideological broadness. There were people from all sides of the aisles on both political affiliation ends, all across the spectrum, who wanted to be a part of the Reform Party simply because they were sick of how the other two parties were working. And it seems like this works, right? Well, that's the thing, though. The third party kind of convinced both these other two parties, hey, maybe we should adopt some of these ideas so people listen to us for a while. And since these parties were adopting these ideas, Ross Perot wasn't really super focused on pushing forward with growing strength in the Reform Party, and the ideological broadness across the spectrum effectively paralyzed its movement on any other campaign or political races, and thus it kind of just stunted and collapsed. So if anything, the problem there wasn't ideological narrowness, it was actually ideological broadness. A similar case can actually be made for the Whig Party, which was a major, not really third party, but at the same time, kind of, sort of, in a way. It would be incorrect to just refer them as a third party, though, because they did actually gain some presidencies and congressional seats, and they did sit as the major opposition for a long time. Well, not a long time, but a kind of-ish time. But what really shattered them was the issue of slavery. And they were divided on that like hella bad. In addition to this, they also had a very broad, big tent spectrum of beliefs and collapsed due to, you guessed it, ideological broadness. So, in this case, what's really stopping a third party? Well, it's not so much a political problem as it is a political mechanical problem. So, in a first-past-the-post, winner-take-all system, you have this principle called Duverger's Law. Now, we go into a detail a bit in a previous episode, where I believe we will provide a link to that in the actual post, and when we post, and when we get this all on there too, so you know, you can go back to that one, as we do not recall the episode at this particular moment, and we can't really stop the recording to find out. However, as we've discussed previously, in Duverger's Law, basically in a first-past-the-post, winner-take-all system, with where a simple majority is needed to win, you will find that the tendency will be to go to two political parties, usually the ones that have the most appeal and political control. And this can happen for a variety of reasons for the minor parties for dissolving and all that, but ultimately the result's the same, in that you get two major political parties that most people kind of agree with enough in order to face off. Now you might be wondering, well, couldn't you add that third party in there? You could, but then you have this issue of the spoiler effect, in which that third party, more often than not, is just going to screw over and split the party they most agree with and give the victory to the other side. We actually see this happen in the case of the good old election on the turn of the 20th century that was between Taft, Teddy Roosevelt, and Woodrow Wilson. Woodrow Wilson won the election with 44% of the vote, because Taft and Roosevelt split the rest of the vote of the Republican Party between the two of them. And that is why the American Union had Woodrow Wilson as a president, a Civil War revisionist who perpetuated this incredibly dark myth about all of us. But we'll get to that whole shining hill in the city in a different episode, because, that is also a whole can of worms to unpack. So, is there a party that tried doing this before? I mean, aside from the Reform Party, yes. There was actually a more recent effort doing pretty much exactly what Andrew Yang is doing now. I will keep pointing this out right now, though. Forward does have specific ideological points. One, they do favor a ranked choice voting system. That is important to note. That is something we actually do agree with. And two, and this is most important, is they want to hear from all sides of the spectrum. Because, again, they're trying to avoid the ideological narrow-ways problem. But there's another political movement that tried pretty much the exact same thing way back around 2016, 2017, right after that election. They were known as the Serve America movement. And back then, we actually tried to help them get off the ground. The problem? Well, there was a limited interest in actually trying to push for such a thing because most people didn't believe that a third party could succeed. And they're right. Under Duverger's law, which is, again, not a political law or anything, it's just an idea within political science, it does kind of make it impossible to run an effective third party. We do have an idea on how it might work, but we're going to cover that in a later episode. It's almost like we're setting up an end of a season here. But basically, what Andrew Yang's doing is what Sam was doing back in 2016, 2017. So where do we stand regarding Forward? Well, we'll tell you this. We want to talk to them and present our viewpoints. We don't expect them to listen to us or give them any much attention, but we're here. They want to hear from American people, so let's tell them. Let's tell them about land value tax. Let's tell them about cooperative economics. Let's tell them about putting that into freed trade. As you've noticed, we've called it freed trade. Now, why are we calling it freed trade? Well, we're going to tell you that right now. And there's two reasons. One, free trade's kind of got a stigma to it, and we're not liking it. And it also kind of opens up these things called joint stock companies and individual private ownership. We're calling it free trade because we are putting an emphasis on cooperative economics and freeing the labor back to the people. Because you deserve to own the rights to your own labor, and the fruits of that should be, and the fruits of all our collective labor should be shared collectively amongst us all. It's a bit of an explanation, but basically, think of it as free trade with cooperative economics, or we're not on board. And that's what we mean by that. So, we're going to present our views to them and talk to them about it, and hopefully they respond back and talk to us about it. But honestly, we don't expect much, and we expect this to flare out before any meaningful, real progress can be made on their political party. Anyways, that's our show. But before we go, we got a couple brigade orders. As we've told you previous, we are going to be starting this now. So what are the brigade orders this week? Well, if you haven't already, we'd like you to start a cardio and basic strength routine. You can start with like push-ups, sit-ups, and a nice little run. That's what we've been doing lately, and it helps a lot. Also, in addition to this, if you're looking to help with the more medical aspect of the brigade, if shit ever does go tits up here, we'd also like it if you'd learn how to dress a basic wound, like cuts, scrapes, and that kind of thing. It's not hard, it's pretty simple and straightforward, and if you have a first aid kit, you have all the tools already available. And please do learn it. It's just generally great to know first aid and that kind of thing, and even have a first aid kit just for emergency preparedness. Because even if it's not some sort of political calamity that befalls us all, there's still things like environmental disasters, which are increasingly on the rise. And just having an emergency preparedness kit would go a long way to helping you, your family, and everyone else. Anyways, if you like what we have to say, like us. If you hate what we have to say, hate us. Regardless, share us anyways. We love to hear from you. We love to hear from you. We don't actually hear a whole lot from y'all, and, that's fine. You hear from us way more than we'd hear from you. But, hey, we all hope you're doing all right out there. Those who wish not to be tread on should mind where they step, and have a great night and a pleasant tomorrow. We'll be back not next week, but the week after, and we will be discussing our constitutional amendment proposals. Alrighty.